For this episode of the Carbon Exposure Project, we travelled to Kuala Lumpur to speak with Dr. Wei Nee, the head of carbon markets at Bursa Malaysia. The Bursa Carbon Exchange, or BCX as it's known, launched in December 2022. Since then, BCX has successfully held auctions for carbon credits and renewable energy certificates. As Malaysia prepares to take on the chairmanship of the ASEAN group of nations in 2025, it's clear that Bursa Malaysia under Dr. Wei Nee's leadership is playing a pivotal role in advancing regional collaboration for carbon markets. Join us as we explore the dynamic and evolving landscape of carbon markets within the ASEAN region. Welcome to the Carbon Exposure Project.
Wei Nee, it is a pleasure to see you once again. Thank you so much for having us here in Kuala Lumpur at the Bursa Malaysia headquarters.
Thank you so much, Renee, and wonderful to catch up with you after our last conversation at the COP28
Absolutely.
in Dubai.
We had a wonderful conversation and I want to dive into that. I'd like, perhaps if we can set some context. Bursa Malaysia and the Bursa Carbon Exchange is a really interesting development in the ASEAN region. Can you give the audience a little bit of background about your work and your team's work at BCX?
Sure. I think maybe just to set the context, basically the Malaysian government for quite some time has been looking into the energy transition space, and they've always come from the carrot approach. But I think in 2021, a time has come for Malaysian government to consider putting a price on carbon. So in Budget 2022, in October 2021, the government, which is Ministry of Finance, jointly together with the then Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, decided to announce that they will come out with a carbon market. Firstly, in a form of a voluntary carbon market, and eventually transit over to the compliance mechanism. And they've mandated Bursa Malaysia to run the carbon exchange. So not only did they actually mandate Bursa to run a carbon exchange, but they also mandate that it shall be a Sharia compliant. So on the 9th of December 2022, Bursa Malaysia, and it is a pride of Malaysia to say that we finally launched the carbon exchange, and it's also the world's first Sharia compliant exchange. And since then, we have had auctions on the carbon credits. Our platform provides three forms of trading. We have the auction, the continuous trading, and we also facilitate off-market transactions.
Fantastic. So thank you for that introduction. And that's fantastic that it's a world first with a Sharia compliant exchange, certainly with carbon and with this continuous evolution. You mentioned the auctions. You've had two auctions recently, one for carbon credits with the Kuamut project. I'd love to dive into that. But also, interestingly enough, for REX, which is fairly unique. A lot of other exchanges, whether they're national or sort of independent, tend to focus on the one vertical, for example, with carbon. You have a diverse offering here, covering scope 1, 2, and 3 effectively. And so can you give us a little bit of background about, maybe let's start with REX and then let's go to the more recent auction, talking about carbon credits.
Sure. I think maybe just to also share with you, in January of this year, Bursa Malaysia, we actually rebrand. So we actually have a new logo. Okay. And essentially the rebranding is actually to inform the world that we have actually transformed from just being a national stock exchange to a multi-asset exchange. Okay. So aligning with that goal of being a multi-asset exchange, the Bursa Carbon Exchange, we also pivot and we enlarge the suite of the portfolio of offerings of environmental attributes to include Renewable Energy Certificate, or RECs. But in Malaysia, actually, the RECs market is a much more matured market compared to carbon credits. So we noticed that last year when we launched the, our trading as well as our auction, the liquidity is extremely low. And of course, it doesn't help that globally liquidity in the BCM is very low as well. But it has been called by corporates, why do we not also include RECs in our portfolio of offerings? Yeah. So that's where on the 25th of June, we partnered together with Sarawak Energy to supply RECs from their large hydro in our auction. Then a month later, we are very proud to say that we have finally introduced the very first Malaysian carbon credits which is coming from the Kwamut Rainforest project in the state of Sabah. So these two projects are very strategic because they come from Borneo, it's Malaysia, where a lot of the carbon sink lies. So Sarawak is a state which is very well endowed with renewable energy, and large hydro being a very huge scale project, they can move the needle in terms of the renewable. And Sabah is very well endowed also in the nature-based and in the nature-based resources. And the Kwamut actually occupies over 83,000 hectares. And it's a very beautiful story of how both states have contributed to decarbonizing, one from the nature and the other from the tech base.
Yeah, and that's a really great story because obviously it talks about, you mentioned the kind of key drivers with regards to the broader energy transition piece at the Malaysian government. Right. You're supporting and harnessing and encouraging development domestically of instruments that can then obviously be traded on your multi-asset exchange.
Exactly, exactly. So for Bursa, the mandate is never just to operate a carbon exchange, but it is to grow the entire ecosystem. Because essentially we are under the Securities Commission and also under the Ministry of Finance. There is a call for a national duty. So we have to actually set up the platform, and the platform is to provide awareness to the investment community. Let's actually start trading, but put in the supplies. So the supplies will come from renewable energy for the RECs, and then from the carbon projects, it can come from both nature and tech-based. Malaysia, we are very well endowed with both natural resources in terms of nature-based as well as from tech-based opportunities. For tech-based, if you look at the palm oil, we have over 450 palm oil mills, and that could provide very low-hanging fruit in terms of carbon credits generated from biogas, biomass, biochar, and then of course our nature is actually when you look at the BUR report that we submit to the UNFCCC, you will notice that our nature has actually provided carbon sink for over 60% of the country. So our forests are working really very hard for that.
Yeah, but the fact that now they're being valued, right, ensures the preservation of them long term. So there's this beautiful integration between nature and then the financial systems coming together here at BCX.
Amazing. And what we are really aiming for is that messaging on the global north hopefully can contribute in climate financing to the global south. Within this region, we have huge potential to supply good quality, high quality carbon credits. If you look at the Kwamut, it has received the highest of the ex-ante rating that B0 has given to it. And that's why you can see that even for our auction, it was actually auctioned at 50 ringgit, just slightly over 10 USD for vintages blended between 2017 to 2021. We are amazingly proud of this particular auction, and it gave a lot of confidence to other project developers to please come to Malaysia to look into co-partnering with our local project developers to bring about this ecosystem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So let's talk about ecosystem, because as a pivot, we're talking obviously about the natural carbon sinks, and there's a clear logical explanation about ecosystem, but you also talked about building out the actual underlying ecosystem of participants here in the region and abroad. And so if you don't mind, let's pivot. Yesterday, you hosted the Malaysian Carbon Markets Forum, which was an incredible event and attended not only by people within the ASEAN region, obviously represented heavily from folks here in Malaysia, but also neighboring Singapore. But we had a number of participants coming from Global North. There were people coming from as far as the United States and in Europe and the UK, for example, all very keen to see the direction of policy. And I'd love to talk, and I'll wrap that with you, but also the amazing sort of momentum that you've garnered here with regards to the auctions across both RECs, carbon, and the potential for further development and investment into establishing further the natural carbon sinks. You had a number of project developers on stage, for example. Can you talk about the burgeoning ecosystem that you have here?
Right, would love to, because the ecosystem forms the underlying foundation before we can grow the carbon projects. And that's why yesterday, thank you so much for being there at the
wonderful.
Malaysian Carbon Market Forum. I really need to actually, give my gratitude to the team that is supporting very strongly on this. And of course, AITA was a very strong partner in that particular platform as well. But yesterday, more importantly, is that we launched Malaysia Carbon Market Association. The association is really very much needed to provide a platform for a collective voice for those with a common interest in the carbon market to, first of all, set up a vibrant ecosystem. Secondly, to actually be able to provide sounding board to the Malaysian government on forming the practicable policies with regards to the carbon market. Thirdly, of course, is with regards to capacity building, ensuring that we have a talent pool of resources that can actually advance the ecosystem. And lastly is on the demand side of it, that the platform also provides an avenue to connect with other carbon market associations among the ASEAN region so that we can hopefully create these kind of interoperable carbon markets. Otherwise, if not, we will have a very fragmented liquidity, and we might as well, through this platform, foster and galvanize our voices that we do need a much more consolidated market to actually, create the pricing transparency and discovery of the carbon credits.
Thank you, Wei Nee, for that. And it's fantastic that you're talking about the Carbon Markets Association and the broader context about supporting the ecosystem. Can we go back to talk about the Carbon Forum yesterday? And what were the sort of the key takeaways, in your opinion, from the actual event itself and the dialogue that you had with the numerous participants?
Yeah, I think yesterday's the feedback on the forum was really quite amazing. And we started off the session with a discussion on the global trends. And we have the standards there, Vera and Gold Standard. I think Vera has actually taken quite a fair bit of a hit. And this is where Vera actually explained on what are the measures that they've been putting in place to continuously improve the methodologies, even well before the criticism came on board. And I love the fact that how Dirt put it very nicely that, if we can accept handphone evolving over the years, why can't we accept that the standards keep improving over time? Why are we so harsh on the past that it impedes us from moving forward in the climate agenda, given the fact that are we not in a state of a climate crisis? And I love the way how you moderate yesterday when you lead into the conversation between reduction and removals. That conversation, that resonated very well with us, Malaysia, because we do have a lot of potential, technical potential for removal projects besides, for avoidance and reduction besides removal. And we felt that like the bathtub analogy that you gave, if you see that a bathtub is is threatening to overrun, doesn't it make sense that you kind of like tighten the tap besides reaching out to a bucket or a spoon to try to dish out the water from the tub? So I think the conversation, which we hope that it will actually reach to the ears of those who are actually the trend setters and the benchmark setters in the world, that they will actually understand that when it comes to the climate agenda, all resources have to come in place. We can't pick and choose. We can't let perfection get into the way of doing good. I think that was the key message among one of them from the session. The other part of it was, of course, on the financing. And I think this is where, it was there was always a conversation, a tug of war between, we should just do good without expecting nature to keep on giving you the financing reward. This is our stewardship. We are obliged to do good anyway. But I think it was really quite practicable from those from the financial institutions is that if you just do good, and it's almost akin to CSR, there is no cash flow. It's just money going in. And you will not be able to see... Exactly, philanthropy. You will not be able to see needle moving in a large scale. For any large scale project, you will need to see cash flow. And that is just being very practicable in a world that you need to converge both the commercial part of it as well as the climate agenda. I thought that was a very beautiful giveaway. You know, I mean, takeaways from those.
These are fantastic takeaways, and thank you for that. So obviously you're referencing, can I go back to the beginning? I was privileged to be the moderator for the first plenary.
Thank you so
and
much.
I had a fantastic group of panelists on speaking and leveraging their expertise. To your point around the continuous evolution, that is a feature that is built into the carbon markets that is often portrayed as if it's a bug. To borrow from Dirk's analogy with regards to mobile telephony,
Yes.
we have an acceptance with regards to technology. When we look at technology broadly, whether it's artificial intelligence or web, whatever it might be, that they continuously can evolve and innovate and make mistakes and continuously improve. There's a continuous feedback loop around improvement, and we see the constant evolution. To the mobile phones, we see iPhones, you know, 3, 4, 5, all the way through to where we are today, 15. And it's a celebration with regards to how those things improve. With regards to carbon markets, somehow the media has it the other way around, that the carbon market needs to be absolutely perfect, and what they're doing is they're not allowing an embryonic market effectively to be able to scale and to grow. We are all very cognizant. Certainly, I don't want to speak for the standards, but certainly what Vera talked about yesterday, Gold Standard was on the panel. We obviously had Dirk Forrester, and we also had a representative from Morgan Stanley speaking around the broader evolution of the market. The market should be allowed to continue to evolve, and there's an active and deliberate continuous evolution that goes on around self-improvement before even criticism. What the media is doing is just turning up the feedback loop in a negative way and saying essentially, well, the market is not scaling, it's not delivering in this perfection way, and therefore their alternative is inaction. And that cannot be acceptable. Because now, to the bathtub analogy that you mentioned earlier, if we think about the finite carbon budget that we as a human species have, is being eroded. And so the bathtub is filling. And to your point, we need to figure out ways that we can marry the commercial imperatives of business and our global economy and mitigate those emissions. Carbon markets provide this very eloquent solution by leveraging part of what is the problem. Leveraging financial markets, but now valuing natural resources, helping to channel finance into these activities, but they'll deliver benefits to communities and to be able to continuously improve and find better solutions. And as the market climbs and you have better participation, new technologies and methodologies can be unlocked. And without that, we're struggling. So that's fantastic. So following in from that, I think we could talk about some of those findings and learnings, I think, that is representative of the broader market. Can we talk about, I guess, the role and importance of this region? The carbon markets today, whether the compliance markets or in the voluntary markets context, tend to be dominated in terms of voice by the global north, right? You and I both live in this wonderful region of ASEAN. And Malaysia is assuming the presidency later this year for the ASEAN region. In addition to opening the carbon market forum yesterday, you also announced some potential for evolution of domestic policies, but also the role for collaboration within the region. Can you unpack either one of those?
Would love to. You know, yesterday was an auspicious day. It was on the 8th of August. Of course, in Chinese, it's very because there's 8 and then there's the 8. But more importantly, yesterday is actually a day for the ASEAN Day. It marks the formation of the ASEAN as an association. So I think on that note, there is a very strong theme, correctly as you have highlighted, on this forum on ASEAN. And this is because Malaysia is taking over the chairmanship for 2025, and you will take over the chairmanship by October of this year. So this year is actually Laos. Laos is actually taking over the chairmanship. And for this year, Laos has come up with what they call the ASEAN strategy for carbon neutrality. And as Malaysia takes over the chairmanship, we came up with the concept of the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework. And the way we see the framework is that it will support the ASEAN strategy for carbon neutrality by operationalizing it. So the concept of this ASEAN Common Carbon Framework, which is an initiative that is under the ASEAN Business Advisory Council of Malaysia, jointly together with Bursa Malaysia. The idea of this framework is that it will look into both the supply and the demand side of it. On the supply side, when we look into Malaysia's context, there are a lot of technical opportunities which the current independent standards do not unlock. And there is also another avenue. We're talking about managing costs, development costs, MRV costs. And there's also another area about we're talking about having these local standards so that we can actually unlock more of the opportunities within this region. Finally, to create an interoperable ASEAN market. So how we look into this framework is that as each countries may want to take over sovereign rights of their own national standards, we recognize that methodologies and VVBs will probably going to be where the most resources will going to be taking place. If we could mutually recognize methodologies that are actually held under other country standards, for example, in this region, Thailand and Indonesia, they already have their own national standards. If we could recognize these methodologies and also shared pool of their resources, we can facilitate and unlock more unique opportunities within this region. Now, we do want to caveat to say that it does not mean that we do not accept independent standards. It just means that we provide more avenue for carbon project developers to decide which markets they want to serve, and they can choose the type of standards that best suits their market demand. That is what we are saying. And of course, through this particular platform, it also provides an avenue for ASEAN carbon market associations around the region to collaborate and to form business partnership shared in terms of lessons learned to be able to advance the ASEAN region. And the whole idea about this ASEAN market, at the end of the day, we want to connect with the global north so that we can provide, credible supplies of high quality to the global north, as well as it meets our own local demand. So this is the overall broad operational strategy.
And it's a really fantastic ambition. And I think it's reflective of, instead of a top-down type of approach and bottom-up, effectively you're fostering, coming back to this word of ecosystem. And what you just described, Wei Nee, is essentially a healthy market where there's choice and competition,
Definitely.
but interoperability and collaboration. You mentioned those words numerous times. What's happening in this region, which is a key source for innovation, is that you mentioned Thailand, Indonesia, Singapore, and Malaysia are all innovating around their own domestic policies. And they tackle it however they choose because it's their own sovereignty. So there could be a carbon tax, there could be fostering development. What's very interesting is that the region understands the potential, as you mentioned, and the endowment effectively of the natural resources of this equatorial belt, and be able to now have policies that are stimulatory with regards to carbon crediting mechanisms, as opposed to what's happened in most of the global north, which have been emissions trading systems based on allowances. So it's this continuous evolution, building from the foundations that potentially that independent standards provide, and continuously improving those over time and allowing domestic seeds essentially to sow and to flourish. So that's fantastic. Can we sort of go from that broader interconnectivity around obviously the role that Malaysia is playing, taking over the directorship of the ASEAN region, and bring the focus back to the domestic ambitions? Obviously, you mentioned, kind of coming back to the beginning of our conversation, that Bursa Malaysia has started with voluntary instruments being traded, and you've expanded to REX as well. But you also are playing an active role as a country, helping to foster and develop also policies moving forward to help to stimulate the demand.
That's right.
So what is and I don't want to put you on the spot here, but what does the policy narrative look like in the long term to stimulate a compliance system here in Malaysia?
Right, I think the policy part of it is always very important. At the end of it, it is one of the parameters that financing look at in order to de-risk themselves. So in terms of policy in Malaysia, the World Bank has been providing us support. So through the MOF, they've actually reached out to the World Bank. So we are together in a working group for the Partnership for Market Implementation, the
Okay.
PMI, for the carbon pricing instrument.
Okay.
And this is also, of course, with a lot of involvement from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Environmental Sustainability, which is very key to driving the carbon market policy. So this particular PMI CPI study on both the carbon tax as well as the domestic emissions trading scheme has been ongoing for the last 18 months. And we foresee that will probably end by the end of next year. And it has been really very rich inputs that the World Bank has provided for us. And it is a hope that through this process, the Malaysian government can make the right choice of the carbon pricing instrument to be able to advance and help to unlock more of the carbon project opportunities. And I think it is very important from Bursa's house view is that a market mechanism, a compliance carbon market mechanism in the form of an ETS, we view it as a lot more superior compared to the carbon tax. Although the carbon tax is a lot easier administratively to implement, but when it comes to a marketplace, it provides an avenue for a win-win. In a cap and trade, companies who overperform can actually monetize their overperformance and sell it to companies that have actually underperformed. And this kind of trading opportunities, which of course Bursa is, we are very
positioned to.
we are positioned, and we have a lot of technical knowledge on how to be able to create a fair and trading marketplace. And the World Bank has actually looked into the entities within Malaysia and have recognized that, of course, Bursa is very well positioned to operate an ETS mechanism. But for us to operate an ETS mechanism is intended to serve the nation's greater good in bringing down decarbonizing costs in a manner that is the most cost effective as informed by the World Bank. So of course, this study is still ongoing, but otherwise our Ministry of Natural Resources and Environment, they are at the moment drafting their national policy on carbon market, which includes Article 6 and also the voluntary carbon market space and the crediting system as well. There is the National Climate Change Bill that is being drafted at the moment, which we hope to see passed by the Parliament by early part of next year. And the NDC roadmap and the LTLETs, they are already at the final stage of completion.
Okay.
So, and there is also another national adaptation plan. So our ministry is really
busy, it seems.
Extremely busy. There's a whole suite of climate agenda and a BTR report that needs to be submitted to the UNFCCC. But of course, for Bursa, we are among one of the stakeholders that continuously provide a sounding board to the ministry as they formulate their policies.
Okay, so Wei Nee, just picking up from what you've just elaborated, and especially coming back to this point around the regional collaboration, COP29. What are you guys hoping to get out of COP29, and what are you hoping to effectively deliver?
Right. I think for COP29, one of our biggest aspiration is to continue on the narrative as Malaysia takes over the chairmanship for ASEAN.
Yep.
And yesterday, you saw the launch of the Malaysia Carbon Market Association, of which Bursa is actually a member of it.
Yep.
So what we aspire to achieve from COP29 is that hopefully we can at least have the first demonstration of alliances among the ASEAN Carbon Market Associations.
Wonderful.
By way of signing of the Memorandum of Collaboration between Thailand, Malaysia, and Indonesia. Hopefully, Singapore can be on board. We also hope to have a forum of discussions among these ASEAN countries on how these ASEAN countries can reach a consensus to support the greater of the ASEAN Common Carbon Framework. So in a nutshell, these are the two initiatives that we hope that we can actually implement by, Baku.
That's fantastic, because again, that helps to actually now implement those, or the interconnectivity, as you mentioned, right?
Exactly.
Is to formalize and establish that. So that's great. Can we come back to something that you mentioned earlier in terms of the broader purpose of Bursa having this multi-asset functionality, let's call it. Something interesting that was said on the panel that I moderated yesterday to kind of talk shop essentially. Alvin Lim from Morgan Stanley mentioned something on the panel which has really resonated with me, which he said essentially, and this mirrors essentially your approach. I want to come to you with a question, but for context, he said that the voluntary markets are very much like venture capital investments. It's effectively equity-based type of investments at risk, harnessing innovation development, albeit at a smaller scale. And that essentially compliance market drivers make projects, so we talked about carbon crediting systems where there's fungibility of carbon credits, much more bankable. And it seems to me sitting here at BCX and Bursa Malaysia headquarters, because you're a multi-asset exchange and you have securities in terms of equities, and you have now these voluntary credits, you're effectively covering both. You're effectively covering this early stage venture, let's call it, with voluntary, and then potentially you've unlocked sort of the conversation around compliance. It means that there's a pathway to effectively have better access to capital and much more bankable, much more scalable solutions when you interweave both of those opportunities. So do you want to talk about that? Because it seems to me that Bursa Malaysia is uniquely placed to benefit from that, and so is your ecosystem.
Exactly. Actually, it is for this reason. And when Bursa, we look at what we are doing in terms of trying to grow the ecosystem, we are not just limited to the platform of the Bursa Carbon Exchange. We are a multi-asset exchange whereby we raise funding from capital and we also raise from the debt as well. So why do we not make use of what we have in the marketplace and extend it to the carbon projects? Great. So this is why in yesterday's plenary 6 on financing, we culminated the session with a QR code that basically invites any of the interested participants to engage for the next few months in an industry working group to see how we can actually raise capital, raise funding for carbon projects. Can it be raised from capital or debt using Bursa's facilities that we have at the moment? But I think the compliance market plays very instrumental role in providing certainty. We have been discussing with local project developers, and they're saying that their project is not going to be bankable unless there is an off-taker. Malaysian financial institutions, we are very comfortable with how we do renewable energy, whereby they would have 21 years of power purchase agreement. So when it comes to carbon credit, they were like, if you are just relying on spot prices, which can be wildly fluctuating, and there is no real demand, given that the voluntary carbon market, as what Dirk has mentioned, is only 2 billion compared to compliance of 800 billion. So therefore, it is making sense that if we have a compliance mechanism, it naturally will unlock financing from not just the capital, but definitely from the debt side of it. So that's why from Bursa, we are going multi-pronged approach, advocating for a compliance mechanism, but at the same time, look into the facilities, the marketplace that we have. How can we advance and provide this kind of carbon project financing?
Yeah, but and there's a lot to unpack there. So on the voluntary carbon side, there's obviously the question around the lack of stickiness, because the incentive to ensure long-term participation is driven in large part by marketing or CSR spend for a lot of these companies, and they want to demonstrate leadership. But in hard times, and especially under criticisms, corporate tends to sort of drop a lot of those voluntary commitments because they're risk averse. But when it's driven by compliance, now it's just a mandated issue, right? And so now the incentive is a penalty for non-compliance, and that, from a rational human and also business perspective, it's a rational action. Now it gets involved, instead of coming from sustainability budgets, which are finite and constrained, to treasury and risk and compliance teams. So it's far more embedded in an organizational sort of roadmap. And that component helps to obviously provide that long-term security for projects, coming back to this word of bankability. As projects now start to structure long-term forward offtakes, based on a future for compliance, then they can take those offtakes to lenders, in this case banks,
Precisely.
and effectively bridge that financing gap. And
Precisely.
instead of having a reliance on this venture approach where a corporate has to step up to provide the risk capital, assuming some of that risk, instead the corporates take the risk off, they provide the guaranteed offtake, and then the financiers do what they can do best, which is provide that access to capital. It's really important now, coming to your point around the role of an exchange, because you sit at the nexus. You can help to obviously not only provide because you're a regulated exchange, the governance and the security frameworks around that to allay the risk teams within banks, but provide a broad swath of participants to be able to provide and compete for that financing. So it's a really incredible sort of kind of what we've done around coming around back to this fostering of an ecosystem.
Exactly. Actually, you're right. I mean, when we look at the Australian model, the safeguard mechanism, we thought they have got quite, a good strategy. Essentially, at the early phase of it, the government serves as like a single buyer that actually purchases and enter into a contract with the carbon project developers just to actually make these early projects bankable.
And stimulate the market demand.
But as the market matures, as the compliance market matures and project developers realize that they can actually sell their credits at a better price than what they have actually locked in with the government. So the government has an exit clause in their offtake agreement that allows them to exit. So then you will see that eventually they will not rely on having the government to provide that backstop, but they can actually rely on the markets to provide a credible pricing to make their project bankable. So I think there are a lot of innovations that compliance can come in. It may not necessarily be a lot of expenses from the government, but the government may need to come at the beginning to provide that kind of a de-risking for early adopters, the project developers.
Yeah, I think that's really important, because I think that there's this, and that's the safeguard mechanism is a perfect example, because it effectively helped to underwrite the early stage of the market, helped to establish the ecosystem. You talked about capacity building of not only the participants in the market, but you also said critical actors. You mentioned VVBs, you mentioned the methodology, folks, standards, etc. It helps to foster that early foundational element of a market. And then essentially, because of the exit clauses in these contracts, allowed the market to float. And essentially, it's no different to how we learn to do things as children. Effectively, when you ride a bike, you ride it with training wheels, and then when you get self-sufficient, you take them off. And it was a similar sort of thing. So now what we see is investment really being underwritten now by the private sector. So what it does is it leverages public finance as a catalyst to then ultimately leverage a much bigger pool of capital, which is from the private sector. So I think, the way that you guys are going, it seems like that's essentially what you're providing, a catalytic event for the growth of the Malaysian carbon market.
Thank you so much. And I think on this note, I think one key takeaway from Dr. Rena that I like to quote is that everything is happening all at once. And so therefore we need to actually accept all strategies and not be picky about it. So I think going back again to my earlier message is that we don't have to wait for the science to be perfect, but we learn along the process as we go along.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, it seems that that's a very pragmatic approach, and I wish you nothing but the continued success. It's fantastic to see this burgeoning ecosystem really starting to grow and to gain pace, and really keen to hear what continues to happen over the next few years and months ahead. Thank you so much, Wei Nee, for your time. It's a pleasure to sit down with you, and look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thank you so much, Renee.
Thank you.